G'day people, I'm Sharyn and welcome. Today I need to start getting a bunch of my quilting squares from my Numeric design set turned into the equivalent of this, a demonstration piece so people can see what it looks like. There are 42 different squares in the set plus a template square, and the template square is the same size as the outside square on all of these. I'm going to use that to make a few extra squares so that I can make a quilt that is 8 squares high and 6 wide. I'm going to do it slightly differently to this one. This one I cut the squares with just under 1/4 inch of allowance around that square, and I covered it with a 1/2 inch tape. These squares have been cut with just under 1/2 inch of fabric around the edge, and that means I'm using a 1 inch tape. Big thanks to my friend Kathryn, who's loaned me her machine. I'm also using this as an opportunity to show the people with the CM17 how to use the width and length keys and winders on their machine, and we'll get started. I'm going to begin by putting the machine onto a zigzag, and I've got two options with changing the width and length of the stitch. This is set at 3 mils at the moment, and I'm going to make it more, and that's the width of the stitch. 5 mils I know works well for this. I could leave that at 1.5. I'll probably take it out to 2 because I just think that's a bit more comfortable, use a little bit less thread. There is, however, another way on this particular machine, and Janome has now put this on a couple of machines where they've got a winder. And if you watch down here, it's saying 5. As I turn this, I am getting different widths, and that's a much faster way to change your width and length than doing it electronically. 2 ways to change your stitch width and length on this machine: electronically or with the winders. I'm going to start putting my squares together, and I do it by lining up the beginning of the square and just butting the designs one against the other. When you start sewing a zigzag on the Janome machines, if it's an electronic machine, it's going to do a lock stitch first. I think with how that's going together at the moment, I'm going to increase the width, and mostly I'm doing that because I've got wide joins on this particular quilt and it's quite a fluffy wadding. One of the other things that I can do on this machine is a pivot, and it's down here, and if I put pivot on, watch what happens. When I stop, the foot will come up. When I start, I don't have to do anything, the foot goes down on its own, but when I stop it comes up. And for some things that works really well, and in this particular case I think it's going to work well for me. I'm at the end of where I want to be, and I want to lock off. You can't see this at the moment on the machine. Above the start stop, just to the right, there is a thing that looks like a target. I'm going to touch that. It's the lock stitch, and if you watch now you'll see what it does. So it did several stitches in the one spot and locked off for me, and now I'm going to use my scissors. You can see there that the fabric wasn't being collected in on that side. It doesn't really matter. If I pull on this as hard as I want to, it's not going to come undone. But for the sake of making things a little bit easier for me later on, I'd rather have that not happen. And the basic reason that happened was that the foot finished down, and so it was pushing things around. By having the pivot function on, I should avoid that happening. And you can see, after I turned the pivot function on, it wasn't a problem. Put the two together at the top. Having just done a lock stitch, the machine knows that it needs to do another one to start. If I hadn't done that, if I'd just taken the fabric out and cut it off with maybe the cutter on the side of the machine, it wouldn't know that, and it would keep going without doing a lock stitch. But because I did a lock stitch, it's going to start with another one. And you can see each time it stops, it gives me an opportunity to move those edges in. Now, as I'm sewing along, I can do the lock stitch as I'm sewing. But I have to keep my foot on the pedal until the lock stitch finishes, and then I can do the scissors. And now all I need to do is make rows exactly like this of the blocks, putting them together, and then I will start joining the rows together. If as you're sewing along, one side is ending up a bit longer than the other, give the shorter one a bit of a tug. As long as you're doing it early enough in the block, it's not going to be visible, but it will help to make sure you've got a nice line at the end. Some of you will be wondering why it is that I don't cover those joins when I just have one row there. I could easily cover each of the individual joins, and you can too. The reason I don't personally do that is because an entire piece of fabric that goes the entire length of the quilt doesn't end up with bits where it doesn't look right. It will always be completely straight vertically. It will always be completely straight horizontally. This is actually one of the reasons that I developed this way of doing Quilt As You Go, because I don't like those things where they just don't match up. I now have 2 rows of 6 squares, and I'm going to join the 2 rows together exactly the same way that I joined the blocks in the row. Line them up, put them down, and start stitching over the join. I've still got my pivot function on. If you don't have a pivot function, lift the foot and pop it down if it is pushing that top fabric out of the way. When I'm coming up towards a join like this, I really want to try and make sure that the join matches across both sides. And just proceed to the end. You may notice that I'm having less trouble with the fabric wanting to do funny things in this direction. That's the kind of thing that happens because one direction is warp and one direction is weft. So the direction I'm going here is just going to be easier, and because I made all of these squares with the squares going in the same direction, I will have that issue every time I'm joining in this direction, but I won't have it coming this direction. I'm now ready to start putting my tape over the joins between the squares. I've got 2 rows joined and I'm going to start putting this on. I'm going to use a different foot. This is the F foot, and I particularly like it because it has a little bit of definition here, and that can be very helpful for me when I'm trying to put this up against the edge of the tape. So I'm changing to the F foot from the A foot. To do that, pull the black button at the back, or the black lever at the back, towards you, and it will drop off. Do not push it away, that will break it. So that's my A foot, and I'm removing it and putting on my F foot. And all I need to do is line the bar under the space in the foot and then drop the foot onto it. If it doesn't go on initially, you may need to use the manual lifter. If you have the electronic lifter down, you can lift the foot with the lever at the back. If you put the foot up, it disengages the lever at the back. It doesn't do anything. So if you're trying to lift things up with the lever, the manual lever, and it's not happening, you need to put it down electronically. If you're making a quilt and you need to cover this up on both sides, start on the back. You'll notice that these squares, every now and then I've got a little place where the thread from the top is down at the back. We haven't quite worked that out yet. It's probably that I haven't changed the needle in a long time. I'm not worried about it in this case because this is just a wall hanging. The back of it really doesn't matter. But if you're getting that sort of thing, it may be a needle issue. This is the tape that I've made. It started out cut at 2 inches. It is folded in and is now at 1 inch. And I'm going to leave a little bit at the end because that's the selvage. And all I am doing is placing it over the join, and I'm going to put the foot down. My aim is to sew this so that it is covering each side. So it's going to be covering the blue line on each side. That's my aim. I'm going to do it with a straight stitch, so I need to change to a straight stitch. At the moment, the stitch is in the middle, and it's where that red thing is. I need to move my needle over towards the edge, and I'm going to use this knob here to do it. Turn it until I get down to 1. It is still going to do a straight stitch. It's just going to do it in a different position. The other thing I do want to do is increase that stitch length because there's no need to have anything that short. I can put it up to 2.9 will do fine. I'm happy for that pivot function to stay on. It gives me more option for moving things around when the machine is stopped. My aim is to look far enough ahead that I can see that both sides, the straight stitching is covered. All I've been doing is keeping that inner edge of the foot against the edge of the binding, and I'm getting a really good result. Then go back to the beginning, and I need to do the other side, but the needle is currently in completely the wrong position. This particular machine has a 9mm gap from one side to the other. I was at 1, furthest left would have been 0. That means that on the right, the furthest right is 9, and I need to be 1 back from that, so I need to be on 8. So I'm turning my width key again. And that's much faster than doing it on the electronic. On the right hand side it's a little bit closer to the edge than it is on the left, so when I'm doing the right, rather than doing it at 8, I might do it at 7.5 to just move it a little bit further over. But that is a very, very minor thing and easily fixed if you've got an electronic machine by just adjusting where you want that needle to drop. Going over to the right side now. There is now an extra row of stitching in here, which is the stitching that I just did putting that tape on the back. And I've got two ways that I can choose to do this. I can choose to put the fabric down, move my needle, and it is so much faster moving the needle with the winder rather than electronically, and I can start sewing now. The other way I could choose to do this, if I really like doing hand stitching, is to hand stitch this on. There is nothing to stop you from doing that. If you enjoy hand stitching, then it's just joining it on. This is no longer something we are doing for strength. We are doing it completely for decoration at this point. These blocks aren't going to come apart. Another thing to remember is, if I do this in a thread that really matches well with this, and I make a bit of a mistake and it's not completely right, it's not going to be anywhere near as noticeable as if I've got a contrasting thread on. And that's why I'm not actually going to continue on doing this now, because I'm just going to have to take it undone. I need a better colour thread that matches better, but there's no point in me having a fabulously matchy thread for you to look at. When I come back and do the other side, I'll try this time at 7.5. On the back, on each side, you will see 2 rows of stitching. One of them was put on when this back piece was put on, and the other when the front piece was put on. I don't mind that on the back of my quilt. If you do, then it becomes perhaps more important for you to put the front on with hand sewing. In fact, you could put the front or the back on with hand stitching if you don't like those 2 rows of stitching there. I find this method of putting together Quilt As You Go very easy, and do remember, once they've been zigzagged together, they are really very, very firm, and it is just decorative. You might want to cover it with ribbon or with tape or a contrasting tape. There's all sorts of different things you can do. Hope you've enjoyed this and that you've learned something about your sewing machines, and I'll see you next time.